Hey you guys, I hope you're all doing well. I hope you're having a good week. Today we are going to be making homemade pasta. So yes, that's pasta made from scratch. We're not gonna dump it out of a box into boiling water. We're gonna make it from the ground up. So we're gonna use a recipe that I found on Pinterest, but it's a Rachel Ray recipe. And then we actually are going to embrace the challenge because one of the things she says, when you read the recipe, you'll see it. But one of the things she says is once you get a handle on this regular pasta, try and make flavored pasta. So we're gonna jump the gun a little bit and we're gonna go straight to making flavored pasta. So what I have in here is sautéed spinach and dried garlic, I should say diced dried garlic, and then salt and pepper and rosemary. So you will see some instructions on how to saute vegetables, and then we're going to get our dough started, and then we are going to strain some of the liquid off of this or press some of the liquid out of it because we don't want our pasta to be too wet. And then we're going to add spinach to it. So we should have this beautiful green pasta. And if you're not a veggie person, this is a way you can trick yourself into eating your vegetables. Now, I don't want you to think that this is like a replacement for eating your vegetables, but it's a way you can sneak some in and maybe not feel like you're being tortured. I love my vegetables, so I'm excited about this. If you don't love vegetables, I definitely want to hear your perspective on our veggie pasta. Last week I told you that we were going to embrace a challenge of adding, or not adding, but substituting a more healthy ingredient. For my pasta this week, I'm going to use a combination of almond flour and gluten-free all-purpose flour. So this is my gluten-free all-purpose baking flour from Bob's Red Mill, and then this is my almond flour from Blue Diamond. So the base of our pasta is going to be those two flours and eggs. So super, super simple. If you're not feeling super bold and like you want to include the veggies in your pasta, that's okay. You don't have to do that. You can just do the general instructions, and I'll make sure that I link the instructions for the basic pasta, and then that I also include when I added the spinach in. So hopefully you are as excited as I am about making pasta. I've been looking forward to this for a while, and I am looking forward to seeing your creations and hearing all about your creative process in the kitchen. All right, so we cooked down about 4 cups of spinach, and we added garlic and rosemary and salt and pepper to it, and then we blended this up in our Ninja blender, and then I strained out the liquid. So you can do that by pressing it into a strainer if you have it. You can squeeze the liquid, which is what I did, out of the spinach because you don't want too much moisture in there. And now what we're gonna do is crack 3 eggs into our spinach, and then we're going to blend it up the rest of the way to combine. And then we're gonna pour this into our well in the center of our flour. All right, so we have got our egg spinach mixture in our flour, and those of you who know me know I'm kind of a little of this, little of that kind of cook. So we are going to mix this in with our dry ingredients, and I'm totally wishing I would have used a fork to start this mess. That was a red choice. So you guys, when you do this, start with a fork. I lost my train of thought there for a minute. Start with a fork, but keep a cup. I don't know if you can see this beside me. I have a cup of flour waiting because If you have too much moisture, you're just supposed to add a little bit more flour to bring everything together. And if it's too dry, you add a little bit more liquid. You saw how much spinach egg we had in there, so I think we're probably not going to need more liquid yet, but who knows? I could be wrong. This is my first run with pasta. But you're going to mix until everything comes together in a ball in the center of your counter. So the well that I made in the center, I just used my measuring cup to press that in. Look how fun. Isn't this fun? Look at the crazy color that we've got going on here. So once you get your dough mixed and kneaded into a ball, then we get to let the dough rest. So I'm gonna try and, I think we're gonna need a little more flour. You guys think of all of this bread and pasta that we've been attempting. I guess I should say biscuits. We've done some really messy labs. I don't know if we would do this in the classroom. How have your moms been doing with messes in their kitchen? I feel like my mom wouldn't like this one in hers. But it smells really good. All those herbs that we cooked with the spinach, you can really smell them. I think this is gonna make for some really good pasta. So this is still really sticky. I'm gonna try and scoot it around the counter and pick up the flour that's kind of moved out of the middle of my pile. And then I'm going to add just a little bit more so it's not sticking to my hand. I feel like the monster from the lake. So I'm gonna add just a little bit of flour. And I just did a mixture of my all-purpose, gluten-free, and my almond flour. I'm really excited to see what this does. And if it turns out great, if it doesn't, oh well. And in the beginning, I just did equal parts almond flour and gluten-free flour. So we had 1 cup of almond flour. There we go. Now it's starting to be less sticky. 1 cup almond flour plus 1/4 of a cup of, or no, I'm sorry, we did 1 cup of almond flour and 1 cup of gluten-free baking flour. And then I was getting 1/4 of a cup of the baking flour and extra poured out. So instead of doing half and half of each type of flour, I just went with 1.5 cups of the all-purpose baking flour, which is fine. So this is still really sticky, so we're gonna add a little bit more flour on our counter. Just kind of roll that back towards it. So the thing I am told that is really important is once this dough comes together and it's not sticky anymore, that we're gonna let it rest. And remember, when we knead the dough, that's developing gluten. Do you guys remember that from our biscuits that we made a couple of weeks ago? Pasta's a little different. We don't really want to develop gluten. So the amount of times that we mix it and the amount of time that we allow it to rest is going to influence the texture of our pasta. So we're still a little bit sticky, but we're getting better, slowly but surely. So then once we get our dough formed into a nice dough ball, and you don't need to use a lot of pressure, be careful if you're doing this on just your counter surface because you can cut your counter. And we just want to cut the dough. It doesn't take a lot of pressure. So we're gonna quarter the dough, so we're cutting it into 4 pieces. And I've already dusted my counter with some flour. So I'm gonna separate these out. I'm gonna add a little more flour. And then I'm gonna cover these with a towel and I'm gonna let this dough rest before I come back to it. And that is really, really important. So when you're making your pasta, make sure you let your dough rest. So we're gonna take that, cover it with a clean towel, and I'm just gonna let it rest. All right, so we've let our dough rest and we are going to put 3 of our pieces of dough off to the side. Leave those covered. And then we are going to roll out our first quarter of our dough. If it feels sticky, we're gonna lightly dust it with flour. So we're gonna flatten this. I don't have a pasta maker, so we are going to do this the old-fashioned way. So Rachel's instructions say that we are going to flatten it. So we've got it flattened, and then we're supposed to fold it in thirds like a letter. Okay, and then if we had a dough machine, we would run it through the skinny way. And then we're supposed to fold it in thirds like a letter again. And we're gonna do this about 8 times, her instructions say. And you want to try and keep even pressure when you're rolling your dough out. And ideally what's going to happen is we're going to roll this out to be so thin that we can see the palm of our hand through it, which will be interesting since my dough is dark green. So we will see what happens. So I'm going to continue rolling my dough out and then folding it back into thirds. And if it's starting to get sticky, you can see mine starting to pull apart. Just get some more flour on your counter and you can dust the top of your dough with flour again if you need to. So if it's getting sticky as you're working with it, add just a little bit more flour. So we've rolled our dough out about 4 times now. We're gonna get 2 more rolls, and instead of rolling it out wide, I'm just rolling it long now. So every time I roll out my dough, when I fold it in like a letter, I turn it so I'm still rolling long. And again, you want to try and keep even pressure so that your dough is going to be the same thickness. So we've got 1 more. We're going to roll this out 1 more time. I'm going to add just a little bit more flour to my counter and the top of my dough. Just a little, not a lot, not too much. Otherwise, we'll start getting too dry. this like a letter one more time, and we're gonna set it off to the back of our countertop to rest while we roll out our other 3 dough balls. Sorry, I made a mistake. We don't want to fold it in half. We want to return the dough sheet to the back of our counter. Oops. And cover it with a towel. So anytime you're not working with your dough, you want to let it rest underneath a towel. So if you were running this through a dough press, every time you passed over it, it should be getting progressively thinner. So we've got that pretty even. It doesn't have to be perfect. This is our first go. I'd say it's going pretty well so far. So we're gonna take our one rolled out pasta. We're gonna return that to the back of the counter, get another lump of dough out, and I just wanna make sure that my pasta sheet is covered so it's not, I'm guessing it's so it doesn't dry out. So, got that covered at the back of my counter, and I'm gonna start working on my next one. Something I have noticed is that the more I roll out my dough, the less it wants to stretch. So just be aware as you are rolling that dough out and folding and refolding it, you may not need to fold it letter style and roll it out 8 times. You may only need to do 5. And when you notice that your pasta, it's dry, not dry, but it's not sticky, and it's getting kind of paper thin, like this is about done. And I've only rolled it out 3 times. But that, I don't know if you can tell the consistency. This is about what I want. In fact, this might even be rolled out enough. This end's kind of thin, so I think I'm gonna roll down here a little bit more to even out the thickness. But just kind of pay attention to that. There's not a super exact science, which is kind of the baking that I really like, or the cooking that I enjoy. It's by feel, taste and feel. So this one's still a little thick. So now that we've got all 4, be really careful when you lift your dough. Try not to tear it. But you should have sheets like this. So I think this one's the best one. But I've got my other 3 resting back here. So I'm going to try and roll this one out a little thinner. This is still a little thick. I'm going to give one more check to these guys because these still might be a little too much. I think this last one is perfect. So by the time you get to your 4th quarter of your dough, you should be making pasta like a champ. We are going to cut our pasta into different lengths. You can use a pizza roller, you can use a knife like I'm using, but I'm gonna do fettuccine style noodles. And if you want, you can cut your rough edges off your pasta so they have clean lines if you want. Not the end of the world if you don't. It's all going to the same place. So, yeah, you can have a little bit of fun with your food. I am cutting them by hand, so I'm gonna give myself some grace and be okay with them being various lengths or widths. We're gonna call it good. And again, if you are cutting on your countertop, just be careful so you don't cut your counter. I would recommend you have a cutting board, or in the demonstration that I saw, Rachel Ray used a wooden, like a butcher's block to roll her pasta out on. So you might even want to do something like that if you have it available. But I am being super careful not to cut up my countertop. So I would suggest to you, maybe don't risk it since it's your mom's countertop, not yours. Bet you guys can just hear my mom and my sister saying, oh boy. So I'm going to continue cutting my pasta. With your homemade pasta, you don't have to cook it as long. So this can go in the pan to cook right away. You can leave it out, let it dry a little bit, and then put it away for another meal. But we're gonna try and do some ravioli with the dough that I have set back over here, and we will see how it turns out. So I wanted you guys to see this attempt, even though it's a failed attempt. The texture of the dough is perfect, the thickness of the dough is perfect, but when I folded the dough over right here and then I cut my noodles, it compressed the dough, and instead of having noodles, I just had compressed dough. I still cooked the noodles, they still turned out okay. I ended up using them for homemade chicken noodle soup instead, which you'll see at the end of this video. But the failed attempt led me to try some other things, and that's okay. Show you guys something. The first batch that I tried to slice, I folded the dough over right after I finished pressing it, and it really just squished back. So these noodles that I've been slicing, I let this dough rest for probably 20 minutes before I touched it, and I want to show you guys. I didn't try folding the dough. I was afraid I was going to ruin it. But after I cut the strips, I squinched them up. I think I just made up a word. I scrunched them up like this, and I'm going to let them rest this way and see how my pasta cooks up when I finally go to cook it. But it seems to be holding its shape much better. So I'm going to just show you what I did. Cut my strip. And then all I did was squish them up accordion style. And that really seemed to make a difference with this batch. Oops. Man down. So you get the idea. So if you're gonna try and fold your pasta, I would suggest doing it just in strips. But who knows, maybe you'll have better luck than I did. So I just wanted to show you guys boiling the noodles. So these were the flopped attempt. I wish I would have shown you what they looked like. They actually sunk straight to the bottom and they stayed on the bottom. And then they stopped the water from boiling. So once that happened, or once the water started boiling again, they started floating towards the top. And now check it out. So I showed you what they looked like before. They were all cakey. So this is where they're at now. And then we're gonna check to see if the inside is doughy or if it's done. Once we score the dough and put the two pieces together with the fillings sandwiched in the middle, then we're going to go around and we're going to press those edges that we got wet together to make the ravioli. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be any special shape. You just want to try and make sure that you've got enough filling in the center and that you squish from the middle out so you don't have any air pockets in there. Kind of like when you're playing with Play-Doh. Like so. Try not to put a hole in it. Then you're going to go around and do that to each little piece. It's super important that you get the edges of the dough wet, especially if it's been sitting for a little bit. That dough does start to dry out. I kept it covered with a towel, but it did get a little bit dry. So try and fill that center with as much of your filling as possible, and then get your edges wet and start squishing them. You can do, I scored the same piece of dough and then just folded I folded the right side over the left, if you will. If a little squishes out, that's okay. But ideally, and if you have a pasta press, if you have the tool to roll out your dough instead of doing it by hand, then they should be roughly the same size, or the same length and width, and you should be able to just lay one piece of dough over the other and then just score right over the top and smush them that way. But if not, you can do it the way I did.